Hello, Blazor fans. Welcome back to another episode of Blazor State Has Changed. It's been a long time since I've been able to do a stream, so bear with me for a minute. I will get this music tuned down and fill you guys in on what's been happening. It's been a crazy month for me. So I had some dental surgery done, some oral surgery this month, and it was supposed to be just a few days resting time. Ended up with a bunch of complications that nobody expected, like a punctured sinus and what's the other thing called? A dry socket, and it ended up taking a month to heal. Has not been pleasant to talk, but it's good to be back finally. So thank you guys for tuning back in. Apologize to all of the subscribers that may not have had any content last month, but it is what it is, and we're back now. So yeah, thanks, Mr. Magoo. Feeling much better. I like the new catchphrase, by the way. If something in Blazor is too hard, make more components. That's what we're going to talk about today, is making components. And we've got what I think is an interesting discussion. I'm going to try to do some live code as well to help with some of the Q&A that I've received over the last few weeks. So I've got some interesting questions. I've been watching Stack Overflow quite a bit. Yes, CodeSnitz, I can eat solid food again, what's nice is these solid foods are not being trapped in my sinuses anymore, which was the big downside to what happened. So the sinus issues were the worst part of all that. You don't want to deal with a wisdom tooth extraction gone awry. But anyway, We've got some interesting questions. So I'm going to put the questions up here in PowerPoint as I go over them, and then we'll open up some projects and do some discussion around it. So let's jump over to my coding screen here. And yes, I do have PowerPoint open. I want some nice big bold letters here. I'm using a presentation that I've got called Razor into the Razorverse. Because I think it's going to answer a lot of those questions. And one of those things is, one of the questions I got was, what legacy web code can I use in Blazor? I'm going to put web code in quotes. So that's a very open-ended question for me. What is web code, for example? This is something that that could range to many different things. So when we say web code, what exactly are we talking about? I think explaining the render tree is actually going to answer this question for most people. But let's talk about web code for a minute. Like, what is web code? Are we talking about HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, .NET? To me, all that is web code. So we got to narrow this down a little bit, right? So the first thing I'm going to say is I'm going to assume that by web code, you either mean HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, or .NET, because we're talking about ASP.NET in general when we talk about Blazor. So if I'm talking about ASP.NET, what legacy web code, or we could take the word legacy out of there even, and just say, what web code existing do we already have? We won't say legacy. That assumes things are dead, or they're not maintained anymore. So what existing web code can we use from the .NET universe? Hey, Bite Me, welcome back to the show. It's been a while. I can still hear some music playing too, by the way. Let me kill that off completely so we are not distracted. I know some people like to play their own music over the background, which is what I like to do, so I don't like to have a lot of streaming music going on in the stream, but we talk about web code. So is this ASP.NET web forms? If it is web forms, then there's going to be some different things that we can reuse indirectly. We're not going to be able to take existing web components from web forms and kind of just stick them in a Blazor page and have them work. But what we can do is we can pull our business logic out and we can compile that into a DLL file, and that DLL file can then be used in our Blazor applications. We do get to minimize the amount of code that we have to rewrite. So there's some efficiencies that we can take when we're reusing web forms code. If we have any explicit HTML that we've written ourselves that's not embedded inside of a web forms component, then we could use that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript inside of a Blazor application. If we shift the discussion to .NET, ASP.NET MVC, and those type of things, so ASP.NET MVC, core, all the above, there is a good article, I'll pop this in the chat room, about using Blazor in an existing app. It's by John Hilton. There's actually, I think, been a couple good articles like this. This was just the latest to cross my Twitter stream. So I think Chris Santi also has one about the same topic here. And you can use parts of, you can use Blazor in an ASP.NET Core application. And then let's look at some demos here too. So I could show where these projects actually do cross over and there's some potential for code reuse. So I'm going to create a brand new Blazor application. So we're still talking about the same question. What code can I reuse when I'm building a Blazor app? So I'm just going to do File, New Project, and we're going to start up a server application, Blazor Server app, and I'm going to enable authentication because this is going to sell the takeaway here. So I'm going to spin this up, and I want to point out a few things about a Blazor Server app that kind of tells us about compatibility with ASP.NET Core and MVC. So I'm letting the dependencies resolve here. So wait till that finishes restoring the NuGet packages. Looks like we're good to go. I've added authentication to this, and you'll notice I have an areas folder with an identity folder, and inside of that is a pages folder and so on. And what is under that but CS/HTML files? So we have Razor pages being used inside of our Blazor application. So this is kind of the inverse of John Hilton's article about putting Blazor in an existing ASP.NET Core application. So we're going to flip this on its head a little bit. So if we look at the authentication bits, they are using Razor pages. So Razor pages do work inside of a Blazor application. If we look at the bootstrapping mechanism for this, look under pages host, you will notice that the host CS/HTML file is a Razor page, and it uses, and this is actually changed recently. This used to be an HTML helper, so HTML helpers work in this context as well, but there is now a tag helper called component, and this renders our root component for the application, our app component. So our component is type of app, and it has several render modes. We could read up on these, but actually we got good IntelliSense here. server pre-rendering or server pre-rendered, it says renders the component into static HTML and includes a marker for Blazor server-side application when the user agent starts. This is used to bootstrap the Blazor application. There's other rendering modes in here. There is server. Let's see if we get an IntelliSense description here. Does not include output from the component. This is also used for bootstrapping at the moment. And then renders a static component as HTML. So what we can do with this is we could take an existing, or we could take a Blazor component and inside of a Razor page or an MVC page or MVC Razor view, we could render a static representation of that component. So that means we won't be able to interact with it. I haven't tried any of the other rendering modes recently to see if that interaction is available yet, but I know that there was some discussion of putting this in the roadmap, so we can use existing, or we can use Razor components in existing CS/HTML files. So there will, or not, I don't want to say will be, but there's a possibility that we can mix and match some of these technologies in the future. So there's some code reuse there. So between being able to use Razor pages in Blazor and being able to put Blazor in a ASP.NET Core application, I do want to note this does say ASP.NET Core 3x application. So there's possibly some compatibility where your application already has to be in ASP.NET Core. So you're not going to go into like an MVC 3 or 4 application and try to drop this in and just expect it to magically work. You're probably going to run into some problems there with the different runtimes. So if you're already on Core, your path of migration is going to be a lot easier. So let's talk about when it's not easier. What about existing things that we already have for other .NET runtimes? Let's look at some Telerik stuff for an example. I could use from the Telerik side of things. We have native components. We're going to skip over that for this discussion. We have ASP.NET MVC components. We have core components. We could actually use any of these, and we could wrap them. The easiest way to do this would probably just to be go straight to the HTML side of things and just say, give me the jQuery components. If we wanted to use something that is, quote, existing web code. And I need to double check here. Nobody's commented on not being able to see this, but hopefully you can see. Yeah, there we go. Just checking to make sure you can see my browser window. Make sure PowerPoint's not overlapping it here. So what I could do, these are all jQuery components. And I could essentially use all of these in Blazor through the JavaScript interop. And basically how I would do that is I would need to reference the jQuery and the CSS files in my application, and I would have to write some JS interop to kind of wire these things together. There's some community projects and stuff that are working on doing some of this for, say, like Bootstrap and whatnot, where we're making calls through the JavaScript interop to existing HTML and JavaScript components. Downside to this, there's some really big downsides. Let's talk about the upsides first. The upside is if I wanted, say, some very robust UI component that I know is going to take a long time to rewrite in .NET. Let's take a look back at all components here. And this is Kendo UI. We also have this for MVC as HTML and HTML helpers and tag helpers. But this is all vanilla jQuery and HTML. So if I went to look for something, let's look for something really, really big, like a PDF viewer. So if there's no alternatives for Blazor for a PDF viewer, but I have a JavaScript version of it, I could essentially just come in and grab the Kendo UI libraries, put the JavaScript files in my application, and I would have to map some of these functions like this to the JavaScript interop in Blazor. But essentially, I would write out this div inside of Blazor, and I would have to give it one of those @ref tags. And then I could call the JS interop and kind of populate this component within my Blazor application. So I could do this. It's completely workable. So there is support for using existing JavaScript libraries within Blazor. So let's talk about the downsides. The downside is I'm completely circumventing the render tree, which is the abstraction of the DOM that Blazor uses to efficiently write to the browser updates to the UI. So it kind of sounds like a mouthful, and it's a bit of a topic to unpack. So let's do that next. So if you haven't heard of the render tree before, or you have, but you still have some questions about it, let's talk about this really quick. So let's see here. Again, this comes from a presentation that I have. I will try to find a link to that shortly and put it in the chat window so you can find it if you haven't seen it before. But what the Razor component model does, or the Blazor framework, is we're using Razor syntax, but not in the way that we did in MVC. With MVC applications, the Razor that we would write would somewhat immediately be, I'm oversimplifying, it's a very complex process, but those MVC views and HTML helpers and tag helpers and all of those things get turned into an HTML string. Blazor works in a different way. It uses something called the render tree, which is an abstraction of the DOM. So we'll talk about that in a sec. What exactly that does. React and Angular do similar things, so this isn't something that is completely foreign to the web. It's not a brand new thing that Blazor invented. It's pretty common practice for modern web applications, and that's where we get our Razor file extension from. There's a big difference between Razor and .cshtml in the way that they are code generated. So let's look at what the render tree kind of entails. If we are building against vanilla JavaScript or jQuery, when we work against the DOM, we are actually calling DOM methods to manipulate the DOM directly. So this is often referred to as direct DOM manipulation. And so our HTML code that's generated from HTML helpers, tag helpers, and those sort of things, that gets put in the DOM, and then we use jQuery or JavaScript to go find those elements that we generated server-side, and we essentially update them, delete them, rip them out, put them back, all directly into the browser's DOM, somewhat by hand. It's all up to the developer to determine how those updates get made. So we may choose to select many elements, delete them, and then re-add them, and it can be very inefficient. So what Blazor does, it creates a copy as a simple object graph, and does all the work inside that object graph, and then it does a diff, and it figures out what actually did change before the final process is complete, and then it updates only the elements that have received some sort of update. If we kind of visualize this, So if we have, this is kind of pseudocode for jQuery here. And we're going to go ahead and just like remove these 3 elements, and then we're going to update them and append them back to the DOM. So if we do that, we're going to say, all right, I'm going to select these 3 for removal. I'm going to take those out. And the last one happened to have 2 child elements that got ripped out as well. We're going to do some modifications. We're going to add these guys back. When we add this back, the orange block doesn't actually receive any changes, where the blue and green did. And then we actually ripped out. So we ripped these all out, repainted all of these in the browser. So that's not a efficient process. So if we do the same thing in Blazor, the code would be much different because we'd be working inside the component model. So I'm not going to show the code here because it could be written a million different ways. It could be data binding, many other things. But we have the same idea. We have our browser, but then we have this object graph. I keep throwing a T on the end there. It's graph. Object graph that is a copy of what's in the DOM. And we're going to work on a copy of that, and we're going to remove certain elements from it. We're going to add some back. We're going to do some other changes. But when we get down to the final process, so this would all be, maybe it's in a button click, and all of these processes are happening within that event. The final result is we've only updated 2 of these items, and none of the other ones have changed. We haven't done anything to the DOM yet. We haven't done anything to the browser. And when we finally do, we're only going to remove those 2 items and update those. None of the other items, the children, the orange block, actually receive any change. And that's because of the render tree. So that's why we want to avoid using legacy. Again, probably shouldn't use that term. We probably shouldn't use existing web code like jQuery and things like that if we can avoid it. If we have something really amazing like a PDF viewer or a mapping component, so maps are very extensive things to rewrite. So we probably wouldn't want to redo an entire mapping component until we have some of the lower hanging fruit taken care of, those type of things. We want to go ahead and reuse this type of stuff. That would be fine. But as far as basic input components and things, there are a lot of those already available in the Telerik UI for Blazor. There's other ways to do that, and there's stuff baked into the framework as well. Binary Chef, welcome. Just saw you popping in there. So hopefully that kind of uncovers a little bit of that question, which was what existing web code can we use in Blazor? So anything HTML, anything CSS, most anything that is vanilla JavaScript. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript, totally usable, as long as the JavaScript doesn't have a dependency on another rendering engine like React or Angular. I haven't tried using those in Blazor. I wouldn't recommend it. It seems like overkill. But the HTML and CSS from existing React components that you may have, that could be ported. And then you would just write C# code to wire up your partially ported React components. So you would replace your JavaScript with C# code, and you could reuse your HTML and CSS from those components. So that's a very open-ended question. So what existing web code can I use? There's so many ways to answer that question. Really need specifics, but I covered as many bases as I think I can with that question. So hopefully that answers a lot. Welcome to the show. Pat, is it? Welcome. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat room. Again, I got some of these questions offline while I was away, and thought I'd answer them on the show. And I'm going to continue with this same subject, I think, unless you guys pop in the chat there with anything you want to know. This kind of leads into the next question I had. There's several of them. One of them was on Stack Overflow, and again, kind of an open-ended question asking about how to get the count for the number of components in a collection of things on the screen. And I think this goes back to just people being new to the Blazor framework, and you're trying to figure out, because you've been writing code like this. Let's go back to this example. We've been writing code like this for a long time, where we're going in and selecting things, and maybe we want to get the count. So we write a selector, and then we count the number of items that we selected in that selector, and that's how we find out how many lists are in a list view. So let's see. Just getting back into Blazor myself this week, going through Blazor University. All right, let's share a little Blazor University if you guys haven't seen Blazor University yet. So Blazor University is a great site to learn stuff. And we got a really nice table of contents here. So this is an excellent site, and it was just tweeted out the other day by Scott Hanselman. He shared it as well. But yeah, it's a good resource there. Bite Me, thanks for sharing that. So excellent resource. Make sure you check that out. Has a lot of very quick and easy details you can navigate about the Blazor framework and learn about it. If you want to find a good chat room for Blazor as well, I'll pop this in there. So we've got our Gitter channel. The Gitter channel for Blazor, I found, has been the best chat room so far. So that is another good one for Blazor resources. And the Blazor University, that's by Mr. Peter Morris. If I don't know if he's in the chat room today, but he's been in the audience for the show many times. Good guy. Does great work on the Blazor University website. So the question was, how do I get a count of the number of items in say I have a parent component and it has children, and this is usually the way we would address that in the JavaScript or jQuery world. So it's a little bit different in Blazor, and that's because of the render tree and the component model, and we really have to get away from writing components with that jQuery type of concept. We're not going to go in the DOM and select a number of elements out. And the example that the user, again, this was on Stack Overflow. The example was, I have an alert box. I want to render multiple alert boxes. How do I get the number of alert boxes? So let's actually build that. It was actually a pretty easy question, I think, for me to answer. Let's see if I can do this live coded, because I thought this was a pretty cool example. So let's say I have multiple alert boxes that I want to display in a Blazor app, and I want to get the count of those things and find out how many. And my opinion was that we don't want to get the count from the component itself. We're going to get the count from the data binding behaviors in Blazor instead. That may or may not be a component behavior. We can discuss that when it's done, but let's do a quick example. This was a file new project example. I just created this a second ago. There's nothing custom in this yet. All I did was file new project. If you rewind the show and about the first 10 minutes in or something, you'll see I just went file new project, created a new server app. Kind of left it at that. So I'm going to run this, and we'll go ahead and just hack away and answer this question. And I think this might help with the overall question of how the component model works and why do we not use these jQuery legacy things. I did it again. I said legacy again. This is going to be a drinking game, I think. So why we don't use existing jQuery components in Blazor, because they kind of circumvent the system here. So this is the basic counter component demo, the fetch data. We're going to modify the counter component. So when we click on it, we get like a bunch of alert boxes that come up, and then we'll have a count of the alert boxes. So, Bite Me, are you implying this will take until Christmas? Because he's getting out the eggnog already. It's a little early for that, my friend. All right. So let's utilize some stuff that we already do have. Again, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript work fine. We're not going to need any of the JavaScript, but we have existing Bootstrap CSS code that we are going to use. And let's see if I can do this off the top of my head. So we've got a div, and it's going to have a class of alert, and then we can also set it to alert danger. I think that's red. And this will have some alert message in it. And then this is going to display. I'm going to control F5. I don't need to debug anything. There's no real code here to go awry. And in our counter page, now we have an alert. So we have an alert, one alert. It's not a component yet, but what's nice about Blazor is we can make it a component very easily. I'm just going to drop into shared and to add new item. And I've got Razor component, and I'm going to call this alert. We call it alert box, alert message. Let's call it alert message. So we have a singular one alert message. I'm going to take that, and I'm going to cut that code, and I am going to paste it inside of this component file. This is what I love about Blazor, is it is that easy to make a component. We now have a component that we can render here as alert message. And we can't put anything in this box yet because I haven't defined any way to do that. It is a static thing. It just says some alert message. So let's fix that. I've got some shortcuts installed that let me do parameters, and I actually want a child content parameter. So I'm going to say para cc for child content, double tab, and I instantly get a render fragment called child content. And I will share this with you all as well. So if we go to the Visual Studio gallery and we look for the Blazor Pro snippets, you will find those snippets that I'm using. The one that I just did with the para cc to get a child component. And you can find those there. So we have snippets for forms, inputs, those type of things, and then some code snippets as well. So parameters, child components, and event callbacks. So this makes writing components a little bit faster. So now we have a child content parameter right here. And I'm just going to put that in this place. So this will be child content, and IntelliSense to the rescue. So now I have a real component that I can do real code with, and I could say this is an alert, and this will be inside of my alert message. And I'll control F5 again, and now I have a singular component that I can display an alert inside of. Pretty cool. That's the easiest way that I can create a component. So I want to answer the question. I want a multiple alert messages, and I want to be able to get a count of those alerts. So if this is something I'm commonly doing, maybe I want some sort of alert message area where I can have multiple alert boxes. So what would that look like? Let's see here. Let me get some of this code or some of these tabs off the screen here. And what I want to do is I want to have, when I click this button, I can append multiple items to a list. So what I might want to do is take and create a new component. So I'm going to do add new item, razor component. Whoops, I did not get to name it. I accidentally hit enter and I meant to hit backspace. So I'm going to close. All right, let's see if they've fixed this yet. So I'm going to rename this, and it's going to be alert message plural. So alert messages. So this one will expect multiple alert messages. And let's see here. I'm going to, oh, it looks like they may have fixed it. So what would happen if you renamed before is you would get red underscores under everything in the file. So it looks like they may have fixed that. And let's see here. Give me 1 second. I'm just trying to find my documentation on this little bit here. All right, can't find that. So what I want to do in this is I want to have a parameter. Let's call it an IEnumerable. Actually, let's pull up the docs. So I'm going to go to blazor.net. So what we're going to do is we're going to use templates. And if we go into get started, we should be able to pull up templates and we'll get a general idea of what we're going to do here. That's not the right templates. Components. And we want, let's see, templated components. So this is the idea. We're going to have a parent component, and then we're going to for each over the items in it and render those out. And then we're going to use a template so we can still control what goes inside of the template component. So what we need to do is make a generic component. And then we'll be able to iterate over that, because what I want to do, let's clear this code out and let's save this. I'm going to close and reopen this just to make sure I don't get that weird bug, even though it looks like it's fixed. I want to take my alert message and let's do at for each, double tab. And in my for each, I want to have my alert message. And then inside of that, I want to render a template there. So when I go over my collection, then I can just render those components out. And then I have a nice component that I can just feed data to, and it will data bind. Essentially the components, the alerts, without without too much of my interference. Let's see. What did we get here? Oh, thanks for the sub coefficient. 7 months. Wow, with a Twitch Prime for 7 months. Really appreciate that. So thank you very much, Coefficient. Welcome back to the show. Sorry it's been a while. But hopefully this is good content for folks, and we'll keep it up. I want to do some more shows next year, bring up the frequency a little bit again. So we want to make this a generic component because we're going to have a template here. And if we look at our documentation for, I thought I had it up here. Yeah, I do. Look at our documentation here. This is what, essentially they have a table, a HTML table, so a data table, but we're going to do alert boxes instead. So we can almost copy this verbatim. So we're going to have this for each loop, and instead of being table row items, we're going to have alert boxes. So this is actually a very basic component that's going to have just 2 little things in it. And let's do the type parameter first. So type param. So we're going to have t item. And this is a built-in mechanism for Blazor. So we're going to have t item. And then we're going to have, again, just like our render fragment here that gives us our child content for the singular version of the alert, this is going to be a t item for multiple things in our multiple alerts that will be rendered inside of here. So that will allow the developer to have full control over that alert message and put paragraphs and whatever divs and stuff they want in there. So we're not limiting them to just text. So just to make it clear what we're doing, and again, I'm going to do para. This might be a good item for the snippets. I don't have one for render fragment of t. I don't believe. Let's see. I can get a list of those things. Help. Very quickly by doing bhelp. This is my snippet thing that I have here. I have parameters and child content, but I do not have one for templates. So it looks like I need to add that. So we'll do this one by hand. So instead of an let's see here. Let's back up a little bit. Clear that out. Again, para, tab. So instead of an object, I'm going to do render fragment of t, and that is going to be t item. So it's a generic collection, or a generic render fragment. And this is going to be alert template. So my alert template is going to go here. And again, this is going to resemble the singular version very closely. We've got child content inside of this div. We're going to have child content inside of the alert message. But now we need a collection because this is expected to be a parent component that has many children underneath of it. Because the question was, how do I get the count of the items that are in it? And the simplest way to perform this is to do it without anything really crazy. Just we'll leave it up to regular generic C# code instead of making some elaborate component that's keeping account for us, because that can get a little bit hectic. So we need a list of things. This could be done a couple different ways. I'm going to do a read-only collection or read-only list. We could also do an IEnumerable here. Whatever you'd like will work. I'm just going to do a read-only list, though, for just this demo. And then this we could call it items. And then we can say that we're going to iterate over items. And then when we get an item, we're going to render it in that template. There we go. So now, oops, this needs to be capitalized. So now we have a generic component that takes a collection of items. We don't care what those collection of items are. They don't have a type. They are a generic type. So we're going to render that item in a template inside of our alert message. Very simple, straightforward component. So now we can use this component. And we're not going to have a single alert message anymore. We can go back and render multiple alert messages. But we need a list of some kind first. So let's go ahead and create a list of items. And I'm just going to do an int because we have a counter. We have a counter. Let's go ahead and use what we already have. And for each time I click on the counter, I'm going to create an alert. And let's start with a empty list of alerts. Like so. So now we have an empty list. So we don't get any nasty errors when we start this up. So we don't get a null reference exception when we first try to render this out. And then now we have an alert messages component. And we will say it is going to be items of alert. That should probably be alert with an S. So we have multiple alerts, and then I need to close this or Blazor gets very unhappy and puts red underscores everywhere. There we go. Not a partial component. No, I'm not doing a partial component. Partials are handy if we are going to put code behind files and those things, but we're just building a generic component here that can render a list of things. So we're going to have an int, a list of ints, and we're going to pop that in the collection. Every time we click on increment, we're going to put that alert in our list of alerts. So I'm going to do alerts, add. So every time we increment our count, we're going to shove the count into our list. So we're just, you can think of it as an array, however you want. Oops, IntelliSense didn't fill that in. This is an IEnumerable for all intents and purposes. IEnumerable, there's a couple interfaces that that we could work with on a list. Let's see, can we do that? Yeah, we can. So IEnumerable, it could, or list. The list object could be an iCollection, an IEnumerable, an iRead-only collection, an iRead-only list of T, which is what we have on our component. So any of these will work, but most familiar is going to be IEnumerable. So we could think of it that way. So we're just creating a collection of things that have to be integers. We're going to stick those in here, and then we can put any type of code we want inside of our alert box and render that out. And I could say my value is at, this is where things get interesting. What do I call this thing? I have my alert message. It is generic. It takes a list of alerts. So there's a built-in mechanism for this inside of Blazor, and it is called context. Let's see, am I doing that right? There should be, context does not exist in the current context. How ironic. Let's look at our markup or our example in here really quick. I don't know why I'm not getting the context out. So items equals alerts. It may not be able to get it from, oh, it's, is it capital? Didn't think it was capital. We can set this to whatever we want through our context property here, and I can call it alert. And I could say alert here, and that should make it happy. So it probably, nope, it's still not going to do it. Alert does not exist in the current context. So what did I do wrong? I have T-item. That should get me a generic collection of things. Type param T-item. And I'm calling it correctly, and I have, did I get my parameters set correctly? Yeah, it should be. Everything is T-items. So, not sure why it's not grabbing the context value. There should be a built-in thing. I have alert messages with an S, so I have the right one. Why am I not getting? I should have the object I'm passing in available to me to where I can just reference the value of it. Let's double check something here. Let's try rebuilding. I'm going to do a rebuild. Let's see if this... So coefficients, oh wait, you're answering. Oh, I didn't see that question. So Pat was asking if I have a class library in a separate project, or if I have one, do I need to import that project library? So if it's an external component, yes, I would put that import here. So for example, if I had the Telerik UI for Blazor, that would go there in the imports file. I'm going to close this all out for a minute, and I'm pretty sure this code is right. Let's do a rebuild, and if this doesn't work, I'm wondering if there was something updated with the last release that changed the way that context works, because this should work. Or I have mistyped something. So my alert template is an alert of, or is a render fragment of T-item. Let's see here. Live coding at its finest, as something in here is not working. I'm just referencing documentation off screen, and I've done this before, so I'm not sure what generic bit it can't find. So T-item, type param T-item should be, oh, well, it shouldn't need this, but let's see. T-item is type of int. It seems like it can't figure out what the context is. It's still not finding it. Oh, it's type of T-item, not type of item. Let's see if that does it. Didn't have to do this before, so I'm not sure what. Not sure what it is doing here. It can't seem to get the context value. I should be able to just reference this value through context, and it should just work. But we're not getting that. Context does not exist in the current. Oh, all right. I am seeing it here, though. specifies the name of all child content expressions. And just to make sure it is not uppercase, which I don't believe it is not. All right, let's try their example and see if something broke in the last update. So I'm on preview 4, ASP.NET Core 3.1 preview 4. I don't want a controller, I want component. So I'm going to copy the example out of the docs and see if there's a similar problem, or maybe I typed something wrong. But essentially, it's the same idea. And let's try their table example component and see if I get items, alerts, and then inside of am I missing? Oh, I see what I did. I didn't use the template. My bad. I've got it now. Alert messages. I forgot we have to specify a template on this one. Alert template. So as it iterates over each item, it needs to apply the template. If it's when we use, I get a little confused by this. When we use child content, the template is understood. It's implicit. We don't need to write the actual template tag there. In this case, we do. So this is where I was getting a little sidetracked. So we want to apply our list of items here. And then we can call our context as alert. We can call that anything we want. I can show that in a sec. And then inside our template, we can write anything we want. We could put a paragraph, a span, any other component, you name it, inside of here now. So I just got a little goofed up on usage. Oh, Mr. Magoo showed up and was correcting me. Somehow I missed chat here. So thank you, Mr. Magoo. And I think from this actually could go, is go on the template, or I could put on the template here. Looks like it works at the top level as well. Alert. There we go. So now it's happy. So now when I click my button, I'm going to put items in a list down here. I'm going to add those items. They're just integers. I'm going to write those out here. This is an alert, and then the alert number will show up in my component. So now this should be fine. So there's my alerts. So I've got 5 alerts now. Current count is 5. So I've already got a count of it that way. But the question that I was answering was, how do I get the count? If I didn't have a current count keeping track, I could also come in here and inside of any HTML element or just right up on the page, I could say I have n alerts. So I'm going to say alerts.count and just use a little bit of link and say I have this many alerts. So it's not like your typical jQuery application where I'm going to go in and actually physically select the number of alerts out of the DOM and count how many are on the page. Instead, I'm just going to go to my data that I'm binding, and I'm going to ask that through code how many alerts I have. And now I should be able to come back to my counter, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 alerts. So this is the way that we're going to handle things in Blazor versus going in the DOM and selecting elements and counting those things and all of that stuff. And sorry I didn't see the chat room there. Thanks for the help. I think we came up to the same conclusion. But you know, Mr. Magoo's always 10 steps ahead of me. So a little discussion over implicit versus explicit. But this is our alert messages box with a template. A very simple way of keeping track of some items is just given an array and write those things out using a template. There's many other ways to do this. If you want to get way more complex, you can have container components. You can add more functionality to this thing. Say we want to add and remove elements from it. The tab example is a great example. I don't know if that's in here anymore. There used to be an example of a tab strip. There's many of them out there. If you just Google Blazor tab strip, I think I have one on my GitHub page. It uses the cascading parameters to keep track. Yeah, here it is, tab set. This is another way of keeping track of how many components are in a container. So that's another place that you could look. This gets a little crazy when you're trying to add and remove things from that container. So I prefer this data binding approach a little bit more than what is in the tab set example. It's a little bit easier to keep track of things this way. Let's see what other things we have we can talk about. Yeah, if you wanted to remove an item, yeah, that's kind of what I was going to get at next, Janescu. Let's go to a bigger example. So I'll go to like something super complex, right, and see how this gets implemented in a larger scale component. Let's go to something massive. And let's say we have a scheduler. This is something new from Telerik UI for Blazor. So you can imagine this thing has children inside of it. And we want to add and remove things from this container. So this is a component with children that are of schedule items or appointments. So we've got this really crazy thing that does multi-views and weeks and days and all kinds of cool stuff. If we look at appointment editing, you'll notice the way this is handled. Sorry, I'm used to on the MVC stuff, the source code is below, or maybe it was, no, it was the last version of this. The source code was below, so you'll see me scroll down a lot. It's in a tab. So I want to view the source for this. Because this example, I'm able to double click and I can edit an event. So I can come in here and make this an all day event and hit save. I can come in and delete an event and it just poof goes away. So I could also get a count of events if I wanted to, because they're all just coming from a data source called appointments. And in those appointments, I have the ability to create, update, and delete all through an editor built into the component. Now, when we do the updates, create, update, delete, the CRUD operations, we're not doing them internally inside of the scheduler. So what we're doing is we're raising an event called onUpdate or onDelete, and we are going to give back the object that it was called on as an event argument. So then if we look, this, I have my fancy little zoom tool in here. Let's zoom, where's that button? There we go. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see really well. If I was in my alert box, for example, if I click remove, what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise an event called update or delete, whatever you want to call it, and I'm going to pass in an argument, which is the object that is in that template. And then I'm going to search through my collection of items. In here, you'll see it's appointments.firstOrDefault, and I'm going to give it the ID, some unique identifier, and then I'm going to do the update on that item in the array. So I could do it that way. If I'm deleting an item, as Janescu asked here, if I'm going to remove an item, I would build the same type of thing in here where I say, give me the appointment that I want to delete, and in my event arguments, I'm given that item, and then I will go find it in my array of appointments and then call remove and point to the item from my arguments. Again, this is a generic collection, so I need to cast it to the right type to make sure that I find it in my array. Then I remove it. And this is nice because I don't have to have all of those housekeeping functions inside of my scheduler or my alert collection. Because if I removed it from the scheduler, let's use that as an example for now, because that's what we're looking at. If I clicked on delete and I was leaving my scheduler in charge of keeping track of all these things, my scheduler, I'd have to have a property on it that I would be binding to called count or something. And then I'd have to get the count off of that. Inside of my scheduler, I'd have to then delete it from its internal collection that it would have to keep. And all of that gets quite monotonous to try to upkeep. So the easier way to do that is to raise an event. We can actually try this real quick. I'm kind of going off script here. Not that there was one, but we would essentially need an event callback. So let's do that. Let's call event callback. And this is also going to be a T item. Never done this before on this example, so bear with me. Instead of on click, we would say on delete. We would need some kind of delete button in this thing too. So let's say that, let's see, what is the CSS code for this? Let's try to render a button in here. Let's do bootstrap alert. And let's see, what is the code for the little X button in here? Alert link, alert. So span, nope, that's not it, is it? Close. Button, close, dismiss, alert. So that is what we need. So let's add that here. So this should render a button. Close, alert, class. And then we need an event handler on that button. So this would be on delete. Let's see. At on click equals on delete. Maybe doing this a little bit wrong. I don't think I call this directly. I need to call, I need to raise it, and then let the user handle it instead. So I need one, this would be an event, let's see, handle, handle delete, And then I'd need to pass in the item. And this may be where I get into where I need the object. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this off the top of my head. This is essentially how we would do it, though. So we'd handle that item, and then we would have to, actually, we'd have to put it in as a delegate of, like this, at. So I've got a question coming in. I'll answer that in just a second. So we need to delegate it this way, I believe. So we need to pass in that item. And then we could bubble it back up. We're doing this in the teller stuff. We're doing it through an event argument. And then on this one, we would invoke, or let's see, we'd do on delete dot invoke async. And then we pass in the item, and that should satisfy it. That actually might work. Again, I haven't tested any of this, and I haven't written this exact scenario before, but I think this is the right direction. So we create a button, we create an event handler, we click it, we raise the event callback of onDelete, and then the user can then set the onDelete operation on their end, which would be our consuming side on the component. So then we would have here an onDelete event that we can do anything we want with, and it would be similar to this. This would be void delete item, and then we would pass in the argument, which that would come over as t item. So that's kind of weird. That actually may need to be object, which is what we're going to cast. Let's see if we can do that. I think this is where object comes in. So we can pass any object in. So it has to be an object. T item is not going to translate well over to an event handler. And then we can say object as item. So we receive that object back. And then we can find it in our array and remove it there. So let me answer Pat's question here. I'm in the process of building a Blazor enterprise app. We want to specify a common routing structure for all pages. Is there a way to set a default route similar to MVC? Should we look into custom routing? Mr. Magoo's running off to get some pizza. Have a good weekend, Mr. Magoo. Enjoy the pizza, my friend. And we'll see you hopefully next week for another episode. Pat, I'm going to say I'm not an expert on routing, but I know someone who has written about it. So I'm going to refer you to Chris Santi's website. Chris is a Microsoft MVP, and he writes frequently about Blazor, and he has an article about creating a custom routing component, or custom routing, custom router for Blazor, in case you need to specify or in case this doesn't answer, I'm not answering your question well enough about setting a default route. I think there's a way to set a default route. I haven't looked into it. There is a couple ways actually that I do know of setting up routes. One of them is through let's see, it should be in pages, hosts. The base URL is one way to set a base route. So this is if you have a domain that is, your app is on my domain / my app. This would be / my app here, and that would set a base route for you. I don't know if that's exactly what you were looking for. There is also, if Chris's article is too much, it's overkill for what you need. There is good documentation in here about routing. And let's see if there is endpoint routing integration. We can map Blazor hub. Let's see if there is a base global routing components from multiple assemblies, route parameters, constraints, URLs that contain dots, nav links. There's the helper. I don't see something specific to that in the documentation. So I would look at, will the base URL fix what you need? So that is in hosts CS/HTML file. If it is a client-side application, it's going to be in your HTML page, your index.html. See if you can set that, see if that does your fixes your routing for you. If it does not, then check out Chris's article, see if that has the information that you need to fix your routing. We can test that base URL in just a minute, see if that works on our local host. Let's see if we can get this working really quick, just to see if I was able to do this. I love that the component system is this easy, that I think I actually have this. This was Janescu's question: how do I remove something? So essentially, I would just reverse this logic. And while I'm in here removing an item, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to take this current count bit out, because now I'm keeping my current count through an array. And if I start removing things from it, my current count is no longer going to be my current count. So instead, we are going to do alert.count +1. And then this one is going to remove the item, which I have to cast. So this should be int of item, and I believe that will work. And current count, I'm going to move this code to current count instead. So I'm not keeping two counts with a static backing field. Right, so I think that actually would do it. Let's take a look at it. And if this works, we'll go on to Pat's question and see if we can just set the base URL. Our counter, click 1, 2, 3. We have 3 items now, and my code is still working so far. If I click this one, oh, look at that. That was it. That's how easy it was, Janescu. Now we have 1 and 3. And our count went back to 2. So if we look at the code for that, that was pretty easy. And I'm talking from some experience here. So if I say easy and it didn't look easy, I apologize. It's not what I mean. I just mean that Blazor is pretty intuitive, that from not looking at documentation on this, I was able to just do it by memory. So here's what we did to remove that item. And again, we're not keeping the array inside of our alert message component. We're just keeping a reference to the items and data binding to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to write out a template for each item, and I'm appending a close button, delete button to each of those items. And that has an event handler called onClick. And what onClick is going to do is onClick is a built-in event handler for a button, and I'm giving it a delegate. The reason I've written it this way instead of writing it, let's remove this here for a second. I'm going to cut this. Instead of just saying handle delete, I need to be able to pass in the item. So it's actually going to give me a red underscore here, and it says it can't convert the method because it's going to pass in the wrong type of delegate. By default, it's going to give me, if I hover here, it'll tell me. And let's see if I can click this and zoom in on it. Wrong button here. I want you guys to be able to read this just like I can. So by default, when I click on click, it is an event callback, but it is an event callback of T, which is the type is Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components Web mouse event args. I don't want mouse event args because if I look down here, what I actually want is event callback of object. And I don't want mouse event args. I want my item that I'm binding to pass it back so the user can delete that item. So I'll go back to my code I had. Essentially what I'm doing here is I'm throwing an empty event handler in here. I could also do this, do an underscore. That's probably a little more understood, actually. I could say I'm going to ignore that event argument, that mouse event args. You can see it now when I hover, the parameter of mouse event args. I'm not going to actually use that. Instead, I'm going to delegate to handle delete and pass in my item from my item, my for each loop, and that gets bound to where when I click handle delete, it gets passed here and then gets handled back to the caller through this method delegate. So I'm just bubbling up this click event with the event args that I want to attach to it. So I'm going to call onDelete, and I'm going to invoke that, whatever the user has set as their method to handle this, passing them the item from the loop. And when I call it from my counter component, I'm going to attach my onDelete handler called delete item. That gets invoked back on here, gets invoked asynchronously here. And I'm going to call inside of that to remove the item that I was given. That takes it out of my collection, and my count updates, everything works just fine. And again, I'm not doing some like jQuery type of thing where I'm going in and selecting alert boxes, deleting one of the alert boxes and then having to recount them again. It's all done through data binding, which is nice. Let's look at the base URL thing real quick. Let's get back to that for a second. If I wanted this app to be my app, I can't remember if I need the trailing slash. I'm going to put it there. Let's rerun the application. And I believe my app is now at, let's see, something did not work here. This may be for static resources. Something has gone awry. So it doesn't like my app for some reason. So that may not be the right place to specify that. It has changed. Let's try taking the trailing slash off real quick just to make sure that wasn't it. I haven't messed around with routing too much in this. This just went back to normal. Nothing at this address. So yeah, that's something I need to read up on myself as well. About the base routes. There may also be a setting in configuration here. So we have our endpoints. Map Blazor hub. Does this have? This takes 3 overloads. Let's see what those are. Whoops. There may be an overload here as well. Let's just double check. Path. Map to the signal R hub. Let's try that one. let's try my app. So I'm essentially, there's a path variable here that we can attach to. Let's see if that does it. I may be doing this totally wrong, by the way, so I may not be giving great advice here, but there's a few places where you can look for these things. And I think I broke it. Nope, it came up. It came up, but it didn't come up as that path. So, oh, it broke it completely. Let's see if I got it through here. No. Yeah, try to go back again. Yep, that's something I need to look into myself. See what that is, where to set that exactly. I know it's really common, Pat, but it's probably so common that it is, maybe it's under use routing, that I'm probably overlooking it. No, it's not under use routing. All right, so I'm sure Chris's article probably has a little bit of primer in it to talk about the basics and what you need and when you need it. But custom routing is an option. So at least you know, like, if you need the nuclear option, you can create your own router. So you can do pretty much anything you need to. It's a little verbose, a lot of code here. I would say there's probably something built in, though. I should look into that and follow it up on next week's show. I need to make a note of that. So we'll do that. Let's see. We are at about an hour and a half here. So let's go back to scheduler component for a minute. This is something that we just released from Telerik. So I work for Telerik. If you're new to the show, you don't know, just a little disclaimer, I do work for Telerik. We are building UI components for Blazor. They're in full release. They are supported. And as you can see in this side panel, they are frequently updated. So we like to put an updated mark on these because some of our libraries have, whoa, Zoom went crazy. Some of our libraries have 60 plus components and it's hard to tell what's new. This one is basically everything is new. So you're going to see updated on all sorts of stuff all the time. So you're going to see that we're always in here working on it. We have globalization is something we just added, but the scheduler is a really big deal. It's something that people have been asking for quite a bit, and it's really a complex UI component. It has support for all kinds of crazy stuff. Like it has a built-in editor, which is what I was using as an example earlier. So this one actually has a built-in pop-up editor that will give us an editor where we can change the title and whatnot of our appointments. So this thing is really cool. I want to show some of this really quick, just because it's an interesting component in itself. And if we go, I'm going to do File, New Project. And if you have the installer for Telerik UI for Blazor, if you want to try it out, there's a 30-day free trial at the site. You can click Try Now, get a free trial, and check all this stuff out. But if you run the installer, there's an MSI. You either run what's called the Control Panel installer, which gives you this little fancy guy, which is really nice. So if you have like many of our products, you'll find them in here and you can manage them all in one place. I'm not going to log in right now. But you just go through that installer and click checkboxes. And when you install the Telerik UI for Blazor, you'll get templates to do File, New Project with Blazor with all of the Telerik stuff already added to it. What's today's topic? We did a huge Q&A on the render tree and how we write components and why we write them the way we do and we don't do direct DOM manipulation. So we built a component, an alert component in a alert container, and showed how to do data binding of a collection of items, and then add and remove items from that collection and have it all update without hardly any code written whatsoever. So you can look back on that. And if you have any questions about it, I'd be happy to open the project back up. Right now we're checking out the Telleric UI for Blazor scheduler component for Blazor, because it also falls in line with what we were talking about today. So I'm going to do a new Telleric project, and these, you're going to find they are almost identical to the file new project experience with the Microsoft templates, but they have the Telleric components already enabled on that. And we're going to go ahead and new up one of those. So it should look pretty familiar. We have a counter and a fetch data and all that good stuff. But if I do Control F5, I'm just going to run without debugging for a minute. Thanks for joining the show as well, Shaky or Shakel 404, Shackle. I don't know how you pronounce that, but we get, instead of a static weather forecast, we have one that has paging and an unhandled exception. What the heck did I do wrong here? That's not good. This worked this morning, I promise. So something broke when I tried to pin. Okay, there it goes. Don't know what that was about. Maybe there was still a resource installing or something. So we have paging and sorting and filtering and all that already enabled, but that's not what I want to show you. I just was kind of making a comparison here that we have our counter and fetch data just similar to the way that we do in the .NET. Right, so that is our app. We've got our familiar pages here. On our index, we've got our grid example. The data grid in itself is really cool, but we don't want to look at that right now. We're going to look at the scheduler and look at one of the demos for that, because it aligns with what we were talking about with data binding. So let's do this, and I'm going to go to the demo page again, and I'm going to grab the demo that says, I'm on the grid. I want the scheduler with the appointment editing. I was already on it. I'm going to view the source code for it. And this one injects a service where it grabs some example data points. I don't have those data points. I don't have the service, which I think is just a mock anyway. So we're not actually going to need that. We just need an array of scheduler appointments, and then we're going to edit some of this code here real fast. So I'm looking for a scheduler appointment. Essentially, this is in our docs, but it's really easy. Let's go to the docs and just grab the code for it. We need to satisfy, actually we really don't. And I'll explain. You do and you don't. So this is an easy way of doing it. So this is a sample model that we give, and this is one that is automatic. So I'm going to come in to data, and I'm just going to add an item. I'm going to add a class, and what's really cool here is I'm going to give it a class of scheduler appointment. And there's nothing really special about this class. It just has a title, a description, a start and end, and an is all day flag. And these are just basically the required data points that we need for adding an item to the scheduler. We actually don't need this. So we could have made an interface here and said, if you have this interface, then an I appointment or something, an I scheduler item, then you could essentially say that the data grid, or sorry, data grid. I'm used to saying data grid. The scheduler takes a data of that satisfies an I whatever. We actually have something cooler going on here that I'll explain in a minute. We just need this. We need this model, but we don't actually have to have it. And I'll show what I mean by that in a minute. And this is a cool little thing that you can kind of implement on your own components as well. It's a nice pattern that you can follow. And if you're using our stuff, then it's a similar pattern, and everything will be nice and happy when it works together. So let's see, we need to import that thing we just made. So data, we're just going to bring in data, and that should have our scheduler appointment item in it. So now we have an array of scheduler appointments. I have lots of red squigglies. Expected, it's probably from this code here. I'm not going to get the appointment service because I don't have it. Instead, this is looking for a start date, and the start date is going to tell my scheduler when to start displaying dates. So I'm just going to do datetime.now, and I'm going to make that display to the most current date, which is right this minute. And then under appointments, instead of waiting, oh, that's a property. I always do that as a method. It's a property. Instead of appointments awaiting a service, when it initializes, actually, we're going to populate this in a minute with some static data, but instead we're just going to let it go to initialize to nothing. And then let's see who is still yelling at us here. We've got, it does not exist in the current context. Appointments, that actually does exist. So I'm going to say we may need to close this and reopen it. See if that goes away. And so far, so good. Nope. Let's try rebuild. Expected into file. Did I paste in something haphazardly? Yes, I did. So there actually is another brace that I'm missing at the end. Now it's all happy. So when we initialize the component, we're going to set the start date. And actually, no, I don't think I can. That's a property call. It's not going to let me put it up there. I'll leave it here in the initialization method, and that should actually set up our component. We should be able to view this. And, oh, nope, there is a build error still. Does not have a definition for ID. So we need to go back to our appointment and add an ID field. The ID field is only needed because of the delete code, and we worked on a little bit of similar code earlier, so I don't feel like I need to explain it right this second, but I will in a few minutes. Just want to get it running. So we should be able to actually view all this, and I think it may be missing some style sheets from some of the input boxes that are on the website, but okay, I don't know what's going on here. Something failed to run. Let's try this again. The app just flat crashed on me, I think. It's taking a while. It took a while to build, so it must have needed to build. Why is it doing that? All I did is move it to another screen. Attempting to reconnect, so something failed again. Okay, just moving it from screen to screen has crashed it. Let's see if this works. So either there's something in the async method that is failing me. Friday, December 6th, that is working fine. Okay. I don't know what that was all about. seemed like it didn't like me moving my browser from one screen to the next for some reason. All right, so we're able to display the what do you call it, the scheduler component, and right now we're not feeding any data into it. But this is what I was talking about with the data binding bits. We're not keeping track of the data internally inside of the scheduler. Instead, we're just binding to appointments. And what is really cool about this, we are getting a raid of 33 from Clarkio. Clark is it's got a fun channel. We usually raid him on Friday. So we've got the raid coming this way this time. So we're talking about Blazor. We'll let the raiders raid for a moment. Welcome to the show. Welcome, Clark's viewers. I'm pretty sure you guys are probably doing something JavaScripty over there, which is all good. We were talking about a little bit of JavaScript today. We were talking about why we're going to avoid it in our Blazor apps. Not that there's anything wrong with JavaScript. It's the methodology of direct DOM manipulation we were talking about not using. So what we don't want to do is go in and hack away at our DOM and remove and replace elements. We want our data binding and component models to take care of those things for us. We'll throw some Blazor gloves in the air for the new raiders coming to the channel. All right, we've got 42 now. We'll catch everybody up. We were talking about data binding. I'll pull up the previous example in a moment. We were just getting into a pre-built third-party component from Telerik, the Telerik UI for Blazor scheduler component, because it kind of piggybacks off of some of the data binding that I was talking about building in our own app. We'll pull them up side by side in a minute and show the architecture pattern that we're using in both. So you can see it at scale, and you can see it in a small, more confined example. So the scheduler component has all of these really robust, crazy features like editing and all kinds of stuff built in. Line 32, where is the R? Line 32, where is the R? I'm not sure. Oh, CUD, create, update, delete. I don't think there's no read method. So the read is just supplying data to the data source. So there is no actual read function on the scheduler. So that's why it's not showing as a read. So we need some better documentation. That's good feedback, Doug, the coder. Which product in specific, is there one specifically you've had issues with the documentation on? So we could feed that back to the right folks. The Telerik UI for Blazor stuff is all brand new, so we're building brand new documentation on it. And we've actually revamped our documentation site this year. So we're trying to get it right, and it's something that we're always working on. It is a big area of focus. Yeah. So we will take that back to the teams, though, see what we can do to, if there's anything specific, Doug, let me know, and we'll focus exactly on that. So what's cool about the schedule here is we're going to data bind to these appointments, and this could come from a service. And so there's a really cool pattern here that I want to kind of show off. And we use this on our drop-down boxes as well, which is nice. We kind of use this throughout our components, and it's something that you guys can follow along with in building your components as well. Thanks for the follow, Frankly Tex. So I'm gonna add some new appointments here. So I'm gonna do appointments.add, and then we need to add a new scheduler item. And the scheduler item I'm adding is just a class object called scheduler appointment, and it has these properties ID, title, description, start and end date is all day. These are suggestions only, and as we add some of these, I'll explain. So I'm going to create a new ID, new scheduler item, scheduler appointment, and that appointment needs an ID. That is going to be, let's start at 0. It should also have a title. Let's say there's a really cool thing going on right now. There's a really cool thing going on right now called the C# Advent Calendar, and we'll kind of pretend that we're working on that as our example here. So let's say we wanted to create a schedule that shows a list of articles or something like that. If you're looking for the C# Advent Calendar, we have no, it's all good, Doug. The Kendo UI bits, we did redo documentation actually twice, I think, since you may have looked at it. So it's been rewritten twice in the last 2 years because of the feedback that we got from folks like yourself. So we take that stuff very seriously. So the C# Advent Calendar, I've just popped it in chat there, and every day for the next 25 days, all the way through December 25th, 2 articles are being published about C# in general. So there's going to be all sorts of stuff, machine learning and C# patterns and .NET Core and Blazor and all types of cool stuff is in here. Somebody just hosted, TBD Gamer just hosted the stream. Thank you, TBD Gamer. And the raid came. I thought that was what was happening. Another raid coming in. So we'll catch everybody up here again in just a second. This is the second raid we've had in the last few minutes, and I appreciate all of the raids today. Ancient Coder dropping in. A TBD Gamer says he screwed up the raid. I don't know how you screwed up the raid, but it looks like it's working to me, so maybe you lost some folks. Who knows? 11, 12 came in. It's happy to have you guys. So we're back up to quite a few folks watching, and we've got Ancient Coder in the chat and TBD Gamer, and everybody's here to look at some Blazor stuff. I'm gonna do another round of disclaimers here. I do work for Telerik. I did happen to be showing a brand new Telerik Blazor component because it does directly tie in with the topic that we are talking about today, which is building components, working with your data binding versus against it. And when you build new components, you want to build them using native architecture and not do the old JavaScript style, jQuery style of direct DOM manipulation and going in and selecting items with like a jQuery type selector and pulling things out of the DOM and replacing them. So we're looking at a very high-end example of how to do data binding, how to work with different data structures and components. And we're looking at like one of the most complex examples you could possibly find, which is the scheduler. Because earlier we built a very simplified version of this, and what I'll do is I'll go round trip. We'll look at the scheduler. We'll talk about the what I feel is like architecturally the high points of it, and then we can go back to the example we built earlier and review that again and show how that was implemented at a very simple small scale item. Somebody, I'm not even going to name them, we're giving away a free license on Black Friday. That's cool. If you can't sell it, give it away, I suppose. We have 30-day free trials of all of our stuff if you want to check it out. So the idea of the show today is not to like plug our stuff, but we do have really good components, and I like the direction that we've taken with our architecture. So I want to show you guys how to implement those things on your components as well. And then if you happen to be using our components, the patterns that I'm showing you will align with ours, and they'll work really well together. So what we're looking at, and we'll circle back to non-paid components in a minute. I promise this isn't like a sales pitch here. We are looking at a scheduler because quite frankly, I don't have a demo of my own that has something this complex in it. This is about as complex of a component as you will find. Scheduler has so many moving pieces. It's working with dates. It's a whole lot of work. So what's really cool here is that our scheduler takes a data source. So it takes a data source and it makes the data source really easy to work with, which is the point I want to show you, is how to make data sources easy to work with in your Blazor components. And some of the things that you should and should not do. And we'll circle back to a very simple example in just a minute, but let's look at what happens when you get into the thick of it and you've got something very complex. So we've got a Telerik scheduler on the page. We have a data component, and in the simplified example, you'll be able to see how all this stuff actually works. Where we have our data source. That data source could come from anywhere. It could be a HTTP call that sets the data source. All that is perfectly fine as long as it is a collection type. We default to IEnumerable. I think I used an iRead-only collection in my example earlier. IEnumerable works as well. If I hover over the data collection here, you'll see, if I zoom in long enough, you'll see that it takes an IEnumerable of T item. So as long as we have something that implements that interface, we can set that data source there. And we have an appointments collection, which is a scheduler appointment. If we jump over to scheduler appointment, it is a POCO that has some very specific fields in it that don't actually need to be these names, but we'll discuss that at the very end. I haven't quite been able to get there yet. We keep getting rated, which is awesome. But these are the default values that we should have in a scheduler appointment. A title, a description, a start and end date, and an is all day flag. So that's the things that the component will look for, the scheduler will try to identify with, and we're going to give it an array of those. And right now we're just building up a static item. And I was talking about the C# advent calendar, and we'll go ahead and just kind of mimic that idea. We're going to put a couple blog posts on our scheduler. So we'll have blog post 1, even though the ID is 0, we'll call it blog post 1. And we need to give it a description. Let's just say it's my first blog post. And then we need to give it start and end date. Dates are no fun to work with, but we'll try here. We need a new date time, and then we can build up the date time. I'm going to use this. Let's see. We need the year, month, day. We also need the time of day because the scheduler is very specific. So we're going to go through all these, and I'll do them explicitly here so we can see what we're working with. We're going to say this is going to be 2019. The month is going to be the 12th month of the year. The day, day. So on the Advent calendar, I have the 13th day. What's today? Today's the 6th. We'll go ahead and put a post up on the 6th. And we also need to satisfy the right overload here. We need the minutes as well. Let's see, minute doesn't really matter. Or, no, actually we need hour. Sorry, hour comes first. The hour of the day does matter. We'll say 8 a.m. Minute. This doesn't matter. Minute and second. So probably doing this a long way. We could also do a parse and just put in some string, and that would work as well. But this is a very, very detailed way to create a start date. And I'm just going to copy that so I never have to write it again. I could do end date, and then we'll go ahead and end this one at let's say 1700, and the all day event, our all day flag will be set to false. Let's just do that. So we've got that now. We've got data to put in our scheduler. So let's do one more of those. We're just going to copy this out. Again, this could come from a service. I'm just hard coding it because this is a quick demo. And let's say our second blog post is going to go out on the 13th day of the year, or the month, sorry. Same time frame. We'll call that one blog post 2. Give it an ID of 1. And now we should be able to rerun our app, and we should actually have some data going on it. And Pranav, going to sleep. Good night, my friend. Thanks for joining us. Let's see, we've got some chat here. Whoa, I'm missing the chat room as my app goes up over the top of it. So let that load up here. Sorry, I'm missing the chat. I'm trying to catch everybody up here. This is quite the host raid day. So you guys chatting amongst yourselves a little bit. Calendars are tricky, Doug. They are a pain in, anytime you work with dates, they are a mess. The Advent calendar is really cool on the first day of Vlogmas. That's how they happen. So we can see now, I added an item to the scheduler, and it just popped up. So we've got that item there. We can scroll down. We can see when it ends. One cool feature of the scheduler is if I click the show business hours, notice it takes off a couple hours here. There's configuration over every little bit of the times that are shown, and notice it might be hard to see on the stream video, but these are a light gray color and this is a white color. So if we click this, it actually takes off the hours that are not defined as business hours. So we've got that. But if we scroll over on the 13th, we've got blog post number 2. There's a blog post number 1. We can double click on this. We get an editor, and we can change this to an all day event, save it. Notice it pops up into the all day category instead of spanning all the hours. We can go back and remove that. So what's really cool about this is that you didn't see me write the code, but it is in there. And it's all relying on how we want to handle those events as developers. It's not internalized into the component. Instead, the component bubbles up an event for us to handle and passes us the item. So what is the folder structure I recommend for components? Awesome. I will get into that in just a minute. This is the pro version of, let's see, a React example. Big calendar, huh? Interesting. When I pull it up, the CSS is going bananas. But yes, this is a very professional version. Can it do staff and room views? Absolutely, it can. So I don't have it in this example. We can pull up another one here. And again, the point of this demo is not to, it's not a product pitch, but if you have questions about it, I'm happy to answer. What I want to focus on is data binding and whatnot, but it does have, and again, this is the first release of it as well. Let's see, day view, week view. One of these had, there we go. So we don't have an exact demo of it on this site yet, but what we do have is, if we look under day view, we have the ability to create slots and define time slots for those things, and we can name these divisions as well. I'll jump over to, let me jump over to our jQuery product that's been around a lot longer, just for a second. So just keep in mind that this is kind of a roadmap of where that chart or where that scheduler component is going, because we've built it before for jQuery. Where is it on here? Data management. There's it under dates. Where did we categorize this guy? There's so many components for this one. Scheduler, last one on the list. This is where it is heading. And if we look under grouping, I believe it is. Maybe it's vertical groups. Yeah. So you can set up meeting rooms and name them and stuff like that. I don't have an example for Blazor. I don't know if the feature is there yet, but it is coming. We just released a scheduler like last couple days ago. So just a few days ago it came out. So we're still adding features to it, but that is one of the things that it can do. And if it doesn't do it already, it's on the list of features to be added soon. We have the days and times, and we can edit. When we edit, what we do is we offer up an on update, on delete, on create method, and then we can handle that ourselves. So what it does is, when we call update component under our event args, we're going to get back the item that is in that has been triggered by we're getting back the item that the event was triggered from. So if we double click on the blog post 1, it is then passing as an event argument that entire object back to this method. So we can then take that and find it in our array, our collection, and then we can manipulate that item, and the collection is updated and the view is updated. So if we look, the first thing we need to do is, it comes off as a generic object. So we need to look in our event args at the item and do a little type conversion to say this is a scheduler appointment. And we're going to look at the ID field and find that in our list that we're binding from. And then if we have a matching item in it, we're going to go ahead and just update the values from the item that came out of our scheduler component. So we're going to find that, we're going to update the values in it, and that then updates the component. And our field change, or our scheduler item changes. So if I said this was blog post 10 instead of 1, we hit save, gets automatically updated in the UI. Same thing happens if we delete it. We get past the item back, and then we just add or remove that item depending on the function we want to have. So if I delete an appointment, I'm just going to remove it from the array, and it is gone. We could do this with a database call as well. So we could call an endpoint, an HTTP endpoint, delete the item out of it, repopulate appointments, and that item would disappear. So doesn't care how we handle it. It gives us the event delegates that we can use. Another thing that it does really cool that I wanted to kind of share is, remember, I bound to a scheduler appointment. This is just a POCO object, and it doesn't have to actually follow the naming conventions that I showed you here. So you don't have to do like a map. So you don't have to have in your database, maybe you have these values, but they're called something else. You don't have to actually map them. So you don't have to do like auto mapper and say that the, whatever description field ends up being called description instead. What's really cool about this is, let's change the name of it. Instead of title, what can we call it instead of title? Heading. Let's call it heading. So now this is called heading. So the scheduler needs to be kind of informed what the heading, or that the title is the heading field. What we can do in here is we can say the title field is called heading, and that will do the mapping for us. And I haven't played with this yet, so I'm going to test this out live right now, and I got a build error. So I did something wrong here. I'm using title everywhere, so I need to change these as well. But as far as the scheduler is concerned, I've told it where to find the title field. So now this is all just up to my code. So I'm not worrying about breaking anything internally inside of the scheduler. So this, like I said way earlier, I don't know if I said it in between raids or on raids. After raids, there were a lot of raids. Notice blog post still works, and it's called title in the UI still. That is by intent. It's a feature, not a bug. So as I was saying, in this, we have the ability to kind of pass in any object here instead of making developers conform to an interface. We can set up how we can give options as to how we would like people to how we would like them to be able to bind their data. So you could have a collection of pretty much anything as long as it has things that you can map to these items. You can call them whatever you want. So if they have a start and end date and they have 2 strings, and you potentially don't even need this Boolean flag, you can map it. ID is completely arbitrary. The only reason I use it here is because I have a delete mechanism and I need to be able to identify each individual item. So I could have other properties in here, and they're not going to interfere with the behavior of the grid or the scheduler either. So if you're writing your own components, this is a really cool way to handle that type of data binding. So some questions here. Per dev licensing seems harsh. Cash trap startup hires. So this is a hot button issue. I don't think I'm going to take it up online. There's a lot of things around pricing. What I can say, first of all, I'm not a salesperson. Sales, if you talk to them, might be able to work with you on certain things. So I'm not. I don't work in that department at all. I know they have group discounts. You can also do things like you can buy a license, and if you have like you have high turnover because it's contractors coming in and out, what you can do is assign a license to the current person in that position. So you don't have to, like, every time somebody gets onboarded, buy a new one. So there's a lot of ways around it. It does offer a lot of value. I'm going to try to keep this short because it's not the intent of the stream is not to be like a product pitch. But for somebody to sit down and write a scheduler component like this is going to cost you a million times more than, well, not a million times, that'd be crazy, but it's going to cost you X times more than one license per year. So, I mean, it's priced around $1,000, $1,200 a license per year. Paying a developer full-time for months on end to build one component is going to cost you a lot more. So that's all I can really say about it. It is, I was a customer for 6 years, so I always found budget for it. It's not easy for everybody to do that, and it's just something that it's kind of a deep topic that we can't quite cover on the show. But some interesting stuff, though, is that you can set these title fields, or you can set any of the fields that you want to bind to by their property name through this kind of technique here. So we could set the description field. You'll find this on all of them and all the other components too, which is really cool because drop downs work the same way. If you have a drop down box, you can just specify what fields you're binding to for the text and the value, rather than having to mold your data into a specific data type for it to work with the component. So here's some things that we can follow in our own components. We can have these data binding things where we can set arrays, and then we can call these update events. And we built one of these at the beginning of the show, so I'll kind of circle back for the people that rated. And we will show how that is done on a smaller scale item. So let's see, which example was I in today? Was Blazor app 18, I think. I've created so many of these things that my file system is polluted with new projects. So in a much more palatable example, we'll go back and look at this again. And it was on our counter component, actually. So we manipulated our counter component to use an array of alert messages instead of just counting by ones. And we're waiting for the compiler to catch up here. There it goes. Took a second. I've got a lot running, so the system's a little on the slow side. And it looks like yep, still going. There we go. Last squiggly to go away. We have one name, and his name is Jenkins. So here's what we need to do in our alert messages. So we had a question that was on Stack Overflow that I answered a while back, and we were kind of revisiting that. And somebody was asking, how do I count the number of components inside of a parent? And my answer was that you don't count the number of components per se, but you count the number of items in the collection you're binding to. So I gave this example. Let's run this real quick. And this kind of piggybacks again. Well, they both of them, one started the conversation, the other one ended it, then we got rated. So I went back and did this again. So this I showed first, then we went to the extreme end and showed the scheduler, and then circled back again to the simple example. So if I click my counter, I'm counting, current count is 3, so 4 alerts now. And then we have the ability to go back and delete alert number 2. Notice my current count went back to 3. So how did we do that? We leveraged the Blazor framework. And this is what I really like about the framework, is it's really simple to define stuff like this. So in my application, I have some components. One is an alert message. The other is alert messages plural. So I have kind of the singular version of it and the collection version of it. So I could define a single alert on a page by just saying alert message, and then I could define some content inside like this, and that would display a single alert. So the alert is nothing more than Bootstrap. So it's a div with a special class on it to show the alert graphics, and then it just displays a child content, which is any HTML component or otherwise that we'd like to put inside of that parameter. So that's how the alert, a single alert box would look. And then when we do alert messages, we're just calling that alert box, and inside of that we're building up a template. And it takes a data source of items. In the Telerik stuff, we call this data. We could change that name if we wanted to, but essentially it's the same thing. It's a collection. Mine is a read-only list. It could be an IEnumerable, which is what we use on the Telerik stuff, is IEnumerable of T item. So there's a generic typed component. It can take anything in and display it in a template, any type of object. So we have that array or collection of items. We also have this thing called the alert template, which is in Blazor called a render fragment class. This says that we're going to insert something into the render tree, the virtual DOM, and it's going to have a type. So that's what gets used here. So in our alert message, our singular version of the component, we render the template and we pass in the item from the collection we're iterating over. So we're going to, for each item, give the item to the template. And then we also have a button that we have wired up with an event handler that allows us to delete items. So we're not going to take and inside of the alert messages component, keep track of the deletes and the number of items and all of those things, because that would just get absolutely insane for every component that we try to make. Instead, we're going to handle that, let the user handle that however they'd like. And we do that through bubbling up event delegates and passing back the value of the item that has been bound inside the collection. So we're rendering multiple alert messages. We're putting a button inside of each one of those, and we're going to bind to the onClick event, and we're going to ignore this little bit here is ignoring the default event arguments. We could build up a more complex event argument that includes that. This was a simple example. I'm just going to ignore it. So we're going to ignore the mouse click event, and we're going to give it instead our own argument, which is the item that was bound to that specific component. So we're going to get the item, and we're going to pass that into an event delegate. The event delegate gets bubbled up to the consumer and passes in the item. So that's when we go back to our counter component and we look and we say, all right, we're going to on delete, on our delete event, we'll handle that. And we'll go into that list of alerts and remove the item, they're integers in this instance, and we'll remove the one that matches that item in the collection. Then it gets taken out. So it's kind of, this is the small version of the scheduler. So that's that was kind of what I wanted to show today. If you came in after the raid, you're getting a very condensed version of it, because we kind of built this over about a 2-hour period. I can't quite go through all of those steps again, but the replay is there if you want to see it from the very beginning. So later today, you'll be able to view that if you'd like. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask. We're going to wrap up here in just a second. So just a quick shout out to some folks. Clark and I just want to say thank you, Clark and TBD Gamer, for the raids today. And we pulled in a lot of new viewers to check things out. Hope you guys like Blazor. Let's see, we do have, let's see, visible. is asking, is that called a forward reference in React? I wish I knew more about React to answer that. I don't know. I've done some React, but not recently, and I don't know what they call those. The component architecture is very similar, though, so there's probably things that are identical and just named different. So it's quite a possibility there. We had a couple questions and concerns around the Telerik stuff as well. If you want to reach out to me on Twitter, or let's see, I'll pop my email in here as well. If you want to shoot an email about any of those questions, feel free to reach out directly. I'll see what I can do as far as like getting in touch with the right people to answer those properly. Again, I don't do sales for good reason. I am a developer advocate, so what I do is I collect feedback from you all, and I bring it to our engineering, sales, and all those teams, and try to help get you guys what you need for what you're working on. And I try to stay away from the numbers and the licensing fees and all those type of things, so I can do better for you, representing you guys. So we're gonna do some more shows. Excuse me for a second. We're gonna do more shows throughout the month, usually on Friday. So I like to do shows on Fridays at noon Eastern Standard Time. I was off for a bit for some surgery stuff, some oral surgery, so I couldn't talk for a while. So that was fun. So I should be back at least weekly, if not more often. We're trying to figure out some more shows to bring you all. I've got some friends, we may bring a podcast back. May do some other channels as well. There's another channel that we're starting called Code It Live. So you'll see some of my coworkers starting their own channels. TJ Vantel has a channel he just started about React. And then we're going to do some syndication stuff on Code It Live. So it's nice having you all in, and I'm going to see if there's anybody to raid. I think I've been raided multiple times today. I don't know if anybody else is still streaming, because most folks that I raid have raided me. And nobody I raid is online right now. Or there's nobody I follow is online right now. Let's see if I've got any live coders team. No live coders team is up today. So I'm going to say happy Friday and let you all go. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks for the follow there. And we will see you next time, hopefully at this time. Again, thanks for the raid, folks. And have a good weekend. Take care.